screen and turn it over to Julie.
So it's recording just in time for me to talk about my stinkiest place.
You don't have to, Julie. We can come back to that.
So I'm Julie Morrison. As Jennifer said, I support the SPDIG projects in Ohio, which is my home state. I'm at the University of Cincinnati. I'm an external evaluator to Michigan's project. They have a very strong internal evaluation capacity. And then I'm external to Pennsylvania as well. And since we're on the topic of stinkiness, my mind immediately went to the toilet and came up with when my oldest was 15 months old, my husband and I took the baby to Prague, which is a beautiful city, but he was my first and I was one of those very protective moms. So anytime I'd change a diaper, I'd have to go to a bathroom that might look like a medieval bathroom. And so I don't even know that it was that stinky, but it was like my newborn, and he wasn't newborn, he was 15 months old, but changing diapers in some of those bathrooms made me feel like this isn't the most ideal situation. So there's that story. Should I pass it to Beth or Corinne? Or should I do my slides?
You want to just, why don't you just go, Julie, and then we'll slide in the stinky places every 3 minutes or so.
Okay. So looking at the participants here, I do feel like I'm preaching to the choir a little bit. There's a lot of expertise in MTSS, so I don't know that I'm telling you anything that you don't already know. I do have the background. I'm a school psychologist, so I have that kind of perspective of, direct assessment of academic skills and behavior skills. But this first slide, points out kind of obvious that we really need to attend to the alignment between what the focus, the objectives of your SPDIG is, what you intend to affect change, and what you're actually measuring. So if it's a reading fluency, early literacy project, you might not use a measure like a state mandated test that involves a lot of comprehension as well. So as direct as possible, if it's, a phonics base and maybe like phoneme segmentation fluency or nonsense word would be better than even oral reading fluency. So you want to, as much as possible, and I think we all know this, but you get close to what's being targeted and then what's being measured. And a lot of the literacy programs that SPDIGs would be implementing have their own measures because they see the potential for that mismatch. So I think ECRI is an example of a very strong reading program that has its own composite score, its own assessments. It has to be sensitive to incremental change. And I see that a lot with as being a measurement issue. A lot of these state mandated tests, they're only given annually, and kids can gain a lot of knowledge and skills, but it won't show up because it's just not sensitive enough. If the state mandated test is a norm referenced assessment, which some of them are, like Iowa test of basic skills is norm reference. We all remember norm reference tells us relative standing. So if you're at the 86th percentile, even if you gain a lot, you might still, relative to that norm, be at the 86th percentile a year out. So norm reference does not work. Criterion reference, which I think most of the state mandated tests are, is better than norm referenced, but it still doesn't zero in on the specific skills that you're targeting. And so the most sensitive would be something that's a repeated measure, short cycle assessment, like a curriculum-based measure. And since you all have MTSS projects, you probably know that curriculum-based measures are kind of the backbone of driving decision-making with MTSS. Let's go on to the next slide. So the most well-known ones are like Acadience, Ames Web. There was like this little divorce with Dibbles, and half of it became Ames Web, and half of it became Acadience, and the remainder became Dibbles 8th edition. and then Easy CBM, and then Fast Bridge. Those are the most prominent ones. There's probably some others. You can always make your own, but these would all have data systems with them that would help you monitor growth, that would give you empirically based benchmarks. So these are really great measures that are sensitive to growth, and you would be getting data right away. So when you think about the SPDIG reporting cycle, if the year starts March 1st and ends February 28th, you don't have that end of year data point. But with curriculum-based measures, you have a fall and a winter and a spring, or beginning of year, middle of year, end of year. And so you could at least report on fall to winter, and you could see a lot of growth from fall to winter. So you'd have data where state mandated tests you wouldn't. Let's move on to the next slide. So in terms of how to use CBM data for reporting, if you just need school level, which is, makes life easier if that's what you need, then you just report the number of students that are above benchmark. And you can do that beginning of year, middle of year, and end of year, or beginning and middle for the reporting cycle. You can also report the movement between tiers. So we'd like to see fewer kids at those advanced tiers, elevated level of risk. So fewer kids needing tier 2 and tier 3 over the course of beginning of year, middle of year, end of year. So those are two things I would look at for school level data. For student level data, if this is your SPDIG project is focused on a reading or some academic intervention, you could calculate rate of improvement. So you could calculate for each student receiving intervention, and it's just like, for example, for oral reading fluency, it'd be the gain from the start point to the end point divided by the number of weeks. So I have seared in my head like 1.08 words per minute at 3rd grade. And then you can compare those to those national rate of improvement to see, is this a rate of improvement that's beating what would be expected or not? And I've used that for a number of projects, and it graphs well, it presents well, it summarizes well. So I'm happy to talk about any of this further with anybody. And on my next slide, if you're not using CBM, what I found works and doesn't work. If you're IEP goals doesn't work. We've tried to use it with another project, and they're too varied, and we haven't had success with that. But if a student has an individualized goal, then you can use goal attainment scaling, and that really does a nice job of summarizing across a variety of interventions. In another project I do, we have about 100 school psychology interns, each doing 6 interventions across the tiers. So tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 academic, 1, 2, 3 behavior. So we have about 600 interventions, a whole variety of targets and interventions. But we have them determine their goal attainment scale rating for each of their interventions, and then we can report that as in the aggregate. And it's really, again, it graphs well, communicates well, it makes sense. Instead of student grades, which are also very messy, I consider like EWIS, early warning indicator systems, which would combine number of courses failed with attendance, with discipline data. And then, you could look at your EWIS beginning, middle, and end of year also. And I know I'm really short on time. So if you feel free to email me or follow up with me if you have questions.
Thanks, Julie, and everybody will kind of get their chance to ask a few more questions of Julie and the others in just a few minutes. But now I'm going to turn it over to Corinne, who's going to talk about, in addition to using some of these standardized tools, doing some things around goals. Go ahead, Corinne.
Yeah, so this is similar to the goal attainment scaling that Julie just talked about. So I thought it was a really nice alignment here. My name's Corinne Wilson. I work out of Old Dominion University with the Virginia SPDIG evaluation. We are in middle of year 2, but the first year we're working with our divisions this year because we're working with MTSS. Every division is selecting an high leverage practice of focus. So they're going through their data decision-making process to identify that HLP of focus, and then they'll identify staff and teachers to work with first in a transformation zone to receive supports on that HLP, and then it will scale as they get further along into the grant. Because every district can select a different HLP, we went with SMART goals in terms of reporting our progress. So to show impact, each district is setting their own SMART goals for students with disabilities. And it might be a subgroup, right? They might be targeting a specific subgroup. All our districts are writing their SMART goals right now. So I don't have an actual example to show. I have what it's going to kind of look like and how it's coming out in just a second. And additionally, each individual teacher that's going to receive supports are going to have their individual SMART goals where we can get whether or not they made progress or not and be able to look at their observations. So if you would go to the next slide, our example here, we have an example division that looked at their data and selected HLP 18 using strategies to promote active student engagement. In general, this division is consistently lower on their reading scores compared to the state by about 14 to 15 points for the last few years. So they know that they want to target long-term goal. They want to target those reading proficiency scores and get much closer to the state average. But so you can read the kind of long-term goal there, but then they're going to have annual benchmarks where for the first year, they're going to track opportunities to respond. They've recognized through their data that by building in the strategies to promote active student engagement, they're going to increase their opportunities to respond. And then hopefully in the long term, impact those average reading proficiency scores. So we have a long-term goal that is one or more of those static measures that is something that they want to address, but then each division can identify short-term measures. And I skipped over my stinkiest place I've ever been to. I grew up in rural West Virginia, and so we'd always have to travel one way or the other to go to like a mall. And so if we went towards Blacksburg, we would pass by the Celanese plant, and we'd always have to roll up our windows, which were crank windows, and we didn't have air conditioning. So we'd roll them up when we passed because it was always stinky going around that curve on the way to Blacksburg. So thank you. I think I'm
Thanks,
passing
Corinne.
it over.
Yep, I'll remember that next time I'm in that area, which will probably be the first time I'm in that area. I probably need to get out there. So we're going to now hear from Beth. And one thing I know about Beth is, in addition to thinking about, traditional and maybe less traditional ways of measuring student achievement, she's been thinking about other student outcomes as well, right, that go beyond achievement. So probably talk a little bit about that and some other things. So here you go, Beth.
I'm Beth Dickman. I'm with Idaho. I'm the external evaluator with University of Idaho for the Idaho SPDIG. And my stinkiest place. So I am from South Carolina. Grew up, I am from South Carolina. So there are two stinky places I remember. One is the paper plant in Cameron, South Carolina. Every time you drive through the whole town, it smells awful. And the other is going to the beach. Like anytime you drive over a salt marsh, it smells about like a paper factory. And like Corinne, I live in Pullman, Washington, and anytime I cross the border into Idaho, you come into Moscow and you pass a cow farm. So right at the border, there's a big cow farm. And then right in the border going down to Lewiston, Idaho, which is our next border over into Idaho, is another paper factory. So I'm surrounded by paper factories wherever I go.
Hey, Beth, this is Jennifer. I think we can generally make out what you're saying, but your audio is a
It's
little
messed
bit.
up.
garbled. Yeah.
Yeah, let me try sitting closer. I
Okay.
think it's coming through the camera instead of my screen. I'm just covering
Okay.
my
We can get
screen
we
up.
can get the basics. I just wanted to let you know, I always want feedback on that.
Oh,
And by the
thank you.
way,
I
I'm
appreciate it.
going to a wedding in Moscow, Idaho in a couple of weeks. So thanks for letting me know.
You really see us. Okay. So one of the things I'm a new evaluator new to this FDIGS. I come from survey research. And one of the things that we kept running into was quantity of data. So we have the fidelity measure that measures how well is this being implemented in the classroom. And you don't always get as much of that data as you want. We also have student outcomes, which were tied for our project, were tied to the IRI scores, so standardized testing, which comes with its own plethora of problems. So I wanted to get something that was a little more child proximal, and I couldn't survey students directly. So what we did this year was we built our beginning of the year and our end of the year survey around some of those outcomes. And what you see on the left is actually our fidelity measure. So we worked with one of the coaches and we said, hey, here's what we have. If they are implementing with fidelity, this is what it looks like. And I'm sorry, the print is super small. What would it look like, or what can teachers report on in their classroom at the beginning and the end of the year that would say, if you're doing these things with fidelity, what will we see in behaviors with our students? And so on the right, these are the questions that we added to our beginning of the year survey and our end of the year survey. And we asked our teachers to reflect on these things in the last week. So we have this 1 week snapshot, which is a pretty good proximal for you can remember your last week at the beginning of the year and the end of the year for this project. So we asked them about off-task behaviors. And what's really cool is I'm just cleaning up this data and we saw growth on all of these. So like everything improved for all of these student proximal outcomes that we have. But off-task behaviors, they decreased from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. Do they remember what you're actually teaching them? And I see all of my stuff is going off the edge, but do they remember the sound spelling patterns? Can they apply what they learned last week to the blending? And I have to apologize. I am actually a sociologist, so the reading indicators, these are all working with the coaches is a huge strength for us. But can they remember the words, the meaning of the words? Can they apply sound spelling patterns? Can they do it accurately? And so we just added that to the beginning of the end of the year survey. We also added for our entire evaluation, we collect data in various ways. So we have our MTSS checklist, and then on the beginning of the year and in the year survey, we also ask our administrators, are you applying the principles that you say you're applying in this checklist? So it's not just do the checklist, give it back to them. It's, well, if you're doing it, this is what you should be seeing happening in your schools. And I was the fastest one. So that's all I have for you guys.
Thank you very much, Beth, and everybody. So yeah, we just want to kind of turn this into kind of a larger group conversation for a little bit with the information kind of fresh at mind, and just to give people a half second to kind of get their thoughts together. I might just throw something out there. I'm curious just hearing about just from all those in the group here. I know one thing Beth has tried to do is measure student attitudes, and I have experience trying to do that as well, not within a SPDIG and actually using the same instrument as Beth. I was just wondering, for those on the call, if anybody's made like a successful effort in doing something like attitudes or motivation, self-efficacy, or anything like that. Even outside of the SPDIG, but kind of within the education realm. Just curious to see what people have experience with.
So I saw this in this last week, and I knew that we had this community of practice coming up. I haven't tried this. I just read about it in an evaluation journal, but yes, I do read evaluation journals. We're working with teenagers, adolescents. It is hard to get survey data because they don't do email anymore. They certainly don't do telephone. Um, text systems work, but school personnel might not have a text, access to their cell phone. But they had, and I thought this was brilliant. They had teenagers show a picture of like the last week, whatever it was like they're measuring. They said, show us a picture of the picture that represents how you feel things are going in the last week, and then give a rating about the week. But it's true. Like I've teenage boys, and they take pictures of like everything, and their phones are full of pictures of their friends. So it's like it was called like photo-based evaluation or something like that. But I think there's ways where just the principle of that, you'd have to come up with the right prompts. But if you were asking about school climate, you could say, show me a picture that you think represents school climate this last week. And then what rating would you give school climate or peer relations or, any number of things. But I thought, yeah, getting data from teenagers is a little bit tricky. And that was like a nice inroad.
That's a really cool idea. Yeah.
I haven't tried it, but
Thanks, Julie. Yeah.
maybe will.
I'm glad you heard about it and kind of brought it to the group. Yeah. Anybody else? I saw the note from I think Chelsea about Arizona's efforts about perceptions. I don't know if you want to talk any more about it, but that's awesome that y'all are doing it.
Yeah, we have a student, a parent, and a staff version of the survey that all gather some of that anecdotal data around perceptions of special ed and inclusion. That gives really powerful data from all different angles. And so the student questionnaires are tailored with more simple language and just can kind of get at some of the attitudes towards special ed, which is, I think, important to hear from students. And we don't get that voice often enough, I think.
Yeah. Thanks, Chelsea. Any helpful hints for actually deploying something like that to students and getting a suitable response rate and feeling like you have accurate information?
So I'm new to the project. Stacy Riccio has been through the project with school districts. We're hoping to start with one of our bigger districts in the state this fall. So I will probably have more input after that. But I know Stacy has done it successfully, and we made like a letter to go out to parents to help support, the rationale and the reasoning behind that. But yeah, I haven't been through the process yet since I'm new to the project, but yeah.
That's great. Thanks, Chelsea. Yeah, we'll look forward to hearing from that. And just so y'all know, so when my experience, we use this elementary reading attitudes survey, which is from the University of Southern Mississippi. And it's a great resource. It's unbelievably reliable, both in the literature and in practical experience. We were trying to show growth, and it's very difficult to show growth because it gets such a consistent read within one school year anyway. But we were using, this was a tutoring program, so there was already time that was going to happen with the students, with the tutors or whatever, right? So we just embedded the survey taking into a couple of the tutoring sessions during the year, both kind of towards the beginning and towards the end. And so had a very near to 100% response rate, had a small amount of training necessary, but then kind of a skilled proctor of the survey. So the student wasn't actually reading the survey. They were saying what they felt or whatever in response to the prompts, and had like the adult marking the survey, collecting them all, transmitting them to the evaluator and stuff like that. So a little bit of work around kind of the edges there, but resulted in getting that information in a way that we believed, and then proved to be very difficult to change because the instrument is pretty sound, and we were happy with that. And then later on, after kind of having that experience, we actually started to question whether attitudes was what that program was really working towards anyway, right? And kind of going back to what Julie said at the beginning, maybe it wasn't the most aligned measure for us. So
Yeah, we built that student filled it out in that survey that you can take
Beth?
online for kids. Oh, again,
Beth, sorry, we couldn't hear
Yeah.
you at all in the beginning there.
oh, sorry. Yeah, I had my grad student build that out. I can share that with you if you want to see it, but we did build out an electronic version that we didn't get to use, but we made it. So I'm
Yeah.
hoping to figure out how to implement it. I like your ideas for that. I wonder if that was kind of my hope, was to be able to implement it with classrooms. We just didn't get the buy-in to get it done this
Mhm.
year.
And I think we did, if I remember right back, Beth, we were actually trying to see if attitudes were changing more for the students who received the tutoring than for those who didn't. And so I think we had a few teachers we partnered with or something like that who did deploy it like class wide. So we got some of the non-intervention students or whatever. So I don't remember exactly what we did to do that, but we did actually get it out to a larger audience in kind of a mass sitting type of event. So yeah, if you can share that link, that'd be great. You know, John, probably both to have in the record of this event, or but even in the chat by the end of the time here, maybe people can check it out too. Thanks, Beth.
I see, Annette, you've got a hand raised.
So Montana has what's turned out to be an incredibly powerful youth leadership group, started primarily in support of our Indigenous youth and voice on their behalf. And that group of young leaders over the past few years has said in their wisdom, hey, can we use our group to meet our non-Indigenous peers across the state? And perhaps they'd like to join our group. And non-Indigenous youth have said, hey, yeah, that's a great idea. So the group has just grown. Named after a debacle by some, I cannot recall the bumbling person during COVID at the federal level, somewhere out of the president's office. It was not the president at the time, was listing um, different groups of individuals across the US and got to our indigenous peoples and could not remember who they were. And so literally on this big national thing that was being videoed and spread all over the news media across the United States, called all of our indigenous groups in the United States something else. And so our Montana group, our students took that with tremendous humor, and they still to this day call themselves Rise, Resilience in Something Else. And so uh, so even though that original group who named them are long since graduated from high school, all students who become part of Rise know the origins and are a little bit miffed, but do find complete humor that no one could remember who they were, that they are just a group of something else. It's since their inception, we have done the same consistent survey with them. So when they meet monthly virtually, that one, because they're spread all over Montana, but two originated out of the COVID era. So virtual meetings. And there's the same survey questions. We have them not a lot, but as often as is appropriate at educator professional development opportunities. We ask some of the RISE leaders to present and in a panel where there are questions, everything from do you feel welcome in your school setting to um, do you have a favorite, content area? What would you like to see different in your teachers in your school, etc. And so we're starting to get quite a cadre of, responses consistently from the inception of RISE to our most recent survey of the students, is that in their wisdom, they recognize that the adults in their school setting are adults. They're not perfect. that more often maybe the things that they would like to see the adults do differently are not necessarily the fault of the adults that they're interacting with, that they are stuck within a system that may not be as respectful to young people and young people's needs. So it's been pretty interesting. It hasn't been, you teachers are awful people and we can't believe you exist. It's actually been quite the opposite, where there's been compassion and respect for the fact that the kids might not appreciate the system, and they kind of figure the adults may not be as fond of the system either. One of the other We also do an annual huge gathering, a 3-day gathering where they're taught leadership skills. They're able, the students help plan it and organize it and lead. And there is cultural components, and it's, just kind of like PD for kids, only at kid level. So it's been pretty interesting. Their results tie off to we do the risk behavior survey, and have for well over 2 decades in Montana. And their responses, we don't get into some of the nitty gritties, like, are you using alcohol and drugs, and are you sexually active, that the youth risk behavior survey will get into, because this, for as large a group, it's still an intimate group, and we respect that there are certain questions we can't ask without the kids being able to be identified. It's been pretty powerful. More and more educators in the buildings these schools come out of are saying, oh, okay, we probably should be listening to what these students are saying. So in one case, a large AA is the largest size schools in Montana. In one of our AA schools, which is kind of unheard of, one of the RISE leaders got the school board in this massive district, and you can go down any of the halls in all of the high schools within this district, and the labeling is not just in English, men's room, ladies' room, etc., but it's also in his native language. That's just one powerful example of internal change, where a young person got stodgy school board members to hear his voice and make that change. Even though Montana does have a law, Indian Ed for All, it's often not honored to that level. So I'll put a link to our website on Rise. It's been pretty awesome watching these kids. So
Awesome. Thank you, Annette. John, I'm thinking, we're getting towards the end. I don't know what people are thinking, if we want to just stay here for the whole group conversation, or if we want to split off quick for 5 and come back. How do people feel?
I think
Thanks for that
stay
link,
here.
Annette.
It's a small group enough of
Yeah,
us.
that's work for everybody. Okay, so one of the questions that I'm going to put it in the chat here now, that we were going to have everybody kind of explore in their smaller groups, but I can just put it into chat and y'all can think on it for a second and think about what's going on in your state, was kind of just future looking. So we've talked a lot about our current approaches. We've talked about within and outside of the SPDIG, but as you think about where you're at right now, I'd be interested in hearing what people have to say about what you think might be missing and what you could change to make up that gap.
Jason, can I ask a quick couple of
Yeah,
questions?
sure, Jenna.
while People are
Yeah.
thinking. Thanks. So, Corinne, these are both for you. But anyone could jump in. I was wondering what you do to measure opportunities to respond. Is it just observation and there's a timing checklist?
I was looking at this division's Plan, Do, Study, Act outline, and that is not defined yet. They've identified their schools and they've identified their pieces. I am also assuming they would be observations on a scheduled basis, is my assumption as well. but I don't think they've worked that out quite yet.
It's interesting because North Carolina came up on that, and I've had other projects as well. When you're reading the research and it's like, they give you opportunities to respond, like, oh, it just seems so simple. And then you start thinking about doing it as part of program evaluation, and it feels a lot harder. I know North Carolina did include in their fidelity assessments something about student engagement, and it's going well after working on it a little bit. The other question I had was, when you are having the divisions, you call them, right? The districts divisions.
Either language works for me.
Okay. When they are choosing their HLPs and it's something like student engagement, do you know what they're using as their general curriculum to ensure that, it's an evidence-based curriculum that's already working, therefore student engagement would be a good thing? An important
I
thing.
am assuming that the coaches know that. I know that the first couple sessions of our Implementation Science Academy this year had the divisions go through and look at their data and consider like kind of the steps to get to the point of actually even just selecting the HLP of focus and why. And their individual coaches are very familiar with what is going on with their division curriculum, with all of those kind of pieces. So the coaches working with them would exactly know that. Us, we do not know that.
Yeah, that's fine. I
But
just was curious.
as we get a little bit deeper, I hope that we'll be able to kind of pull it together in a full package to talk about.
Okay, thanks, Corinne. Corinne.
And Corinne, there's just a question here from Leslie. When it comes time to actually calculating, are you kind of on a binary 1 or 0? You got your numerator and your denominator, or how y'all think you'll be actually doing the calculations?
I'm not sure if we'll go with, I had assumed it was a yes, no, but as I was looking at Julie's slides, actually, I was wondering if it might actually be some kind of sliding scale that we kind of report. We are reporting progress toward their overall SMART goal for the next few years. So that would definitely be kind of a yes, no. And then we only have 5 pilot divisions in this. So then we have the opportunity in that explanation of progress to actually talk about what each one did and how they're making progress, what was their goal, and then what does that look like as progress for students with disabilities specifically, so that we can have some actual numbers attached to that, be able to quantify it for each division some.
I was trying to put the scale in, and then when I hit
Yep.
to change line,
I Googled it when you sent your slides, and I was like,
So
oh, maybe
it's a
we can
5-point
kinda-
scale,
Yeah.
and it's like +2 is much more than expected of the goal. +1 is somewhat more. 0 is as expected, but we translate that to no change. So if nothing moves, neither improve or not improve, it's a 0. And then -1 is somewhat less than expected, and -2 is much less than expected. And then you tell whoever's doing the ratings that like the extreme scores, so +2 and -2 should only be reserved for about 5 to 10%. For growth or loss, it's like 5 to 10% that you'd expect to see in 5% of similarly at-risk students. So this should be extreme scores of +2 or -2. But it works really well. And then there's a book, it's kind of the classic goal attainment scaling book. It shows you, Corinne, how to convert it to T-scores. So then you can like aggregate it that way too, if you wanted to go that route. Or you could just do a mean of, 2 point or 1.8 or whatever,
Yeah,
Awesome.
that's a great idea. And not sure if we'll have that much detail for the assessment of the SMART goals for the teachers. We're gonna have to see what that's gonna start looking like as that starts to come in, so that
This goal attainment scaling actually came out of like the mental health fields for folks that are working on very individualized goals. Yeah, it's a way to show accountability and monitor progress by when clients are working on very different goals. So it's meant to be very individualized, but it would work nicely for students with disabilities too.
And I just wanted to note, Leslie, you had mentioned in the chat that you've kind of done this pairing or whatever. I wondered if you wanted to share anything about that.
Sure. So this is for another project, not the SPIDEG, but we use the scale a little bit differently. And some people switch from a -2 to +2 to 1 to 5 because they didn't like the 0. Because for us, 0 is like achieve. You have met your goal. A 1 would be you've exceeded your goal, and then 2, you've really exceeded your goal. The challenge that I'll say that I found is when you are dealing in a qualitative goal that's been set, it's hard for people to conceptualize what the full range of the GAS would be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for that reason, I agree with you. The book sets it as 0 as expected growth. And so we put 0 as no change. And to me, it just makes more sense that that middle ground is nothing positive or negative happens and anything above or below.
Yeah.
And then what the other thing you said, I forget, but
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk
oh,
with you more.
scaling it is the hardest part.
Yeah.
Because ideally, and Corinne, this might be relevant to your project, but ideally, like you would sit down with that client and you would decide mutually, like, what is a +1? And you operationalize, you quantify that. What is a +2? What is a -1? What is a -2? And then we all agree. So it's a reactive measure because it's like goal setting. It helps the client, the student understand, oh, this is the goal I'm working on. Now I, know what it's going to take to get a +1 or +2. But yeah, it's that scaling part of goal attainment scaling is probably the trickiest part. If you make it too easy, and everybody could get a +2. You make it too hard, everyone's going to get a -2.
Yeah. Yeah, I know we're getting really close to the end here, but Kristen had mentioned in the chat too, it sounds like they might have created a tool for themselves or used something and then felt they needed to go change something with engagement specifically. So I just wanted to invite Kristen to tell us a little bit about that experience if she wanted to.
We had our external evaluator interview our coordinators to get information on our assessments, like the school fidelity tool, the look for tool, and the DCA. And we actually, for that student engagement question, and Jennifer, you'll remember because we talked about adding that. It was just too long. So we'll still have a student engagement question, but we got feedback that because it was so long, it was hard to answer. So we'll make that simpler.
Did they give you any suggestions, Kristen, along with the feedback about what might work better? Or did they just say, change it, we want something different?
Yeah, they didn't give us any
Okay.
suggestions, but we're piloting school level training right now. So we'll be bringing all those resources back and getting input from them. So hopefully we'll be able to drill down a little bit more.
Awesome. Thanks, Kristen. And Jennifer, I suppose I'll turn it back over to you here for the last 26.7 seconds.
Are you timing me? This was great. And of course, it brings up more and more questions, but that just means it was the right information. I think one of the so many interesting points that come up, one just brought up by Kristen, but I think was a thread throughout. You want the simplest thing that works, right? You also, to Julie's earliest point, I think the thing that's most proximal to the purpose of your overall goals, right? So I've had groups come in and say, we're going to use graduation rate. And they have, a behavior thing. And maybe, but that's really worth looking into because there are typically many other things that happen prior to graduation that are more related to the intervention that you're using. So lots of good thinking. If we have more questions for this group, they may come back. We don't know, hopefully. But at the very least, we know we have them at the directors webinars, the SPIDEG national meeting. So let's be thinking how we can follow up on the work. we learned about today. So thank you all, Jason, Julie, Beth, Corinne. It was great to have you.
All right,
Thank you,
thanks,
guys.
y'all.
Thank you, John, for organizing us.